Hello, I'm Jennifer Torrence, and you're listening to the New Music podcast. Each year, New Music invites an emerging artist to curate an event at our space in Oslo that showcases their musical interests and their community. This year, we have invited the composer and musician Luis Fernando Amaya, who has put together a program of Latin American and European artists who, in different ways, answer the question, can composition help us connect to the more than human? In this episode, we will get to know Luis, his background and his interests, and his ideas as a curator. The music that you will hear is by Luis, and it's available at Bandcamp in his album Cortahojas.
Hello, my name is Luis Fernando Amaya. I am a composer who comes from the Mexican state of Aguascalientes, which is right in the belly button of Mexico. It is, I think, a very beautiful area. It's an open valley with a high desert climate. And the reason why I talk about this is because I think that many things in my music and my interests and in general, what I do has a lot to do with where I come from and how I grew up. I'm gonna elaborate on that later. I started my musical journey actually quite young, when I was 5 with the violin, and I hated it, and then moved to piano and loved it until I had to learn the right way, and then I hated it. And all of this pushed me to percussion, which is my main instrument, along with the jarana, which is a traditional Mexican instrument, descendant of the Spanish Baroque guitar, which is, to me, basically another percussion. It is a string instrument, but is very percussive. I started, my compositional practice, I feel like it probably began at the same time as my percussive practice, but I didn't start thinking about composing until maybe when I was 16. And something that I think has really shaped the way that I think about music is that I was never too interested in, I was always interested in the idea of composing, and in the same way as Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms and Eric Satie. I don't know, this idea of the European composer. But I did realize that I didn't like to compose what I thought as music that much. I was very interested in, my music sounded more like things that happened, if that makes any sense. They're like sonic experiences that I wanted to have in the world, more than this kind of separate universe where music happens, where the music of Beethoven happens. I was really interested in seeing how my experiences in my daily life, how could I amplify them, or how could I delve more into them, or how could I was very, and I am very interested in how could I live for longer in these sonic experiences that I really liked. And what I find interesting is that without noticing it, a lot of my music ends up being, in retrospective, an exploration of the sounds that really fascinated me from my hometown. I didn't realize this until I moved back to Mexico. I lived for 5 years in Chicago, where I did a PhD at Northwestern University. During the pandemic, my partner and I moved to to Mexico, to Aguascalientes. And living there, my partner told me something that really stuck, which is, she said something like, so being here, I realized that everything that you compose just sounds like this place. And that was great because it makes complete sense. I hadn't realized it, but the connection between the insects and birds and traffic and Mexicans being noisy sometimes, but at the same time, this stillness of the high desert, it is a very important part of the music that I do and how I think about music and the things that I'm interested in. And I've been fortunate enough to live in different countries and cities in the world. So I've been fortunate enough to live in different cities and countries in the world, and all of these soundscapes have kind of become part of my music in many ways. And my biggest inspirations are still these sonic encounters with other animals, other than myself, I mean, or the curiosity I feel about how could sound be a way to relate to plants, for example. And of course, listening to a whole ecosystem doesn't have to be, one that excludes humans at all. But listening to an ecosystem makes me want to listen, or if not imagine, how the parts that I cannot directly hear, how would they sound like? How are they participating sonically in the same way as they are participating in every other way?
Your PhD is titled Composition to Connect with the More Than Human. And I want to probe this a little bit more because there has, in different ways, been a kind of nature turn, in quotes, if I can say it like that, where composers have a renewed interest in the sounds of the more than human. And sometimes I personally experience it not necessarily as a connecting, but rather as a kind of capturing, and then maybe making a portrait of that captured sound. I'm interested, or what I'm intrigued by in this title is to compose to connect. Can you unfold this aspect some more?
Growing up in a place that has such a stark contrast between the indigenous cultures that still live in Mexico, that have a lot of practices and ideas that challenge all the practices and ideas that came after the colonization. It's a context where you can, in many ways, you don't have a lot of choice, kind of like seeing what influences you from both. But there was a moment in which I realized that you do have the option of being aware of what ideas have influenced you, from your parents, from your peers, from the world in general, and you can try to discern which ones make more sense to you. And to me, the encounter, when I experienced the culture of the Comcaac in Mexico, which is in the northwest. It's an indigenous group, and they live in the Sonoran Desert in the coast of the Sea of Cortés. I had the experience of going there to celebrate their New Year's Eve, which is during the summer solstice. And even though I had always in my life felt very interested and attracted by the indigenous cultures of my country, and even within my family's history, I have always been disconnected in many ways. I am from a very industrialized and very Eurocentric place in Mexico. So when I had the opportunity to see how some people relate to the world that is so different and so wise in many ways, that was like there's a before and after for me in that sense. And actually in my dissertation, the way that I begin is I tell a story of when I went to Punta Chueca, or Socaich, that's the actual name of the town, and I got into the sea. It's extremely hot there, 45 degrees or 50 degrees Celsius. And the first moment I arrived, I went into the water, and I started speaking with this fisherman who told me that he had just encountered a fish that he had never seen before. And he told me that the fish gave him his song, the fish's song. It's hers. I don't know how to call the fish, but you know what I mean. And then he asked me, "Do you want to hear the song?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, please do." And it was this very beautiful, small, tiny song. That's the only way in which I can describe it. And there's a before and after for me in which I understood that music for him was a way in which he connected with this fish. There was an introduction through music between the fish and him, and had to do with the sounds that arose in his mind when he encountered this fish. But also he saw it as the fish, like that's the way in which the fish introduced itself. There's a personal connection, and there's also a lack of hierarchy between between the two of them. They're just two beings meeting. And that's when I started to understand that there's so many different ways of seeing art and music, or art in general, but specifically with music. I was interested in how it can function as a device, not to speak about the things that you care about, but to speak to, and to expect a response, maybe. Maybe that response doesn't have to come directly from the beings that you're speaking to, but maybe that response can come from the experience that you have while composing or while creating this. And this took me on a journey that I guess I still am in it, where I'm interested in how people do this in many different contexts, in many different cultures. Some people do it in a very personal way. Some people do it in a way that has to do with their traditions. And I find them all fascinating, and I find it more fascinating that these practices actually have an impact in people's daily lives. Just to mention one person that I think is fascinating, I interviewed for my dissertation the artist and photographer Walter Kitundu. He's particularly a bird photographer, and his practice is to approach birds in a way in which they don't fly away from him, but actually fly towards him. He tries to establish personal connections with these birds, and the way in which he does it is with body language. He observes the birds, knows them very well, usually because he knows a lot, and then starts to move like them around them. This is something that through time, hours, days, or weeks, makes the birds really comfortable around him. And after that, he establishes personal relationships with the birds on the birds' terms. And if you see his pictures, you understand how this is so important. The birds are flying towards him. The birds are next to him, but he didn't force them in any way. And this practice of taking pictures of birds has really transformed the way that he relates to birds in general, not only while he is trying to take a picture of them, and also transfers to the way he relates to any other animals, or as he says, even the human animal. You know, he stresses this idea of conversation or a dialogue as something that has to be in both in the terms of both of the parts that are participating. If you only come to have a dialogue with your own terms, then it's not a dialogue. And this can go so far beyond just speaking or relating, and I'm interested in these things, and I try to bring them into my musical practice, either with psychological exercises or with, I guess, I'm going to rephrase that. I try to bring them mostly with psychological exercises. I try to bring myself into situations, usually mental situations, that force me to step out of my own terms. And I can elaborate on that. On this.
Please do. I would love to hear an example of these exercises.
Yeah, I have this cycle of pieces called Bestiario, which translates to bestiary. And for those who might not know, these kinds of... a bestiary is a book that comes from the Middle Ages in Europe, and it's just a collection of beasts. The cool thing is that they developed in many different ways. They started becoming more imaginative. They also started referring to humans in many ways. There's also some bestiaries that are like social critiques. And there's many bestiaries of of the Americas when it was being colonized. And I always thought that these bestiaries said more about the people who wrote them than about the beasts in them. And I was interested in exploring the idea of a bestiary who would be about animals that I imagine, but animals that develop a certain sense of agency and autonomy from myself. In a similar way in which the character of a book has agency, and if you don't respect it, you will have a very unconvincing story. It's like forcing James Bond to act like the Pope, you know. Maybe there might be more connections between those two, but you know what I mean. You need to respect the agency to actually obtain something from the character. The character, even though you might create it, it's also the result of thousands, if not more, narratives that are not yours, that live within your brain, your collective memories, and it has a life of its own. So what if I try to do that with imaginary animals? And I have a pretty established process of writing these pieces. For example, the first thing I do is to meet with the performer that I'm working, and I try to have no preconceptions of what I want to compose. And we'll try to look for sounds that feel compelling, and also that sound like they could come from an organic body, whatever kind of body it can be. And once we find this, I listen to them for a long time. I try to do kind of like free associations, just listen to them, see what I relate to these sounds, and then we meet again, and then we try to look for sounds that could be related to this first sound. So it starts to grow. Eventually, throughout the course of months, I start getting more sounds and more ideas of what this kind of animal could be and in what kind of situation it would be. And after that, I just try to relate to this animal in a way, in a personal but respectful way. You know, there's a distance definitely, and then I try to compose a piece with it, both with observation, but also I try to. I do try to impose something sometimes. The way that I see this is that usually these pieces are 70% the animal and 30% me. There's some things that I cannot let go, so I force them into the animal. But that 70% is really important because it has pushed me to write music that otherwise I would have never written.
Can you talk about that change? Are there some characteristics that you notice, or is it piece specific?
It's very piece specific. For example, the very first piece of Bestiario, I loved composing it, but I don't like it a lot because it's way more repetitive than I like it to be, in the sense that those animals turned out to be two fish who are mating. But they have, like many animals, they have sexual dysmorphia. So they're very different from each other. The female in this case is very big, and the male is very small. So the male fish is trying to mate, but his life is in danger, as it happens a lot in nature. So there's so much back and forth, that I just had to respect, and it was great. And there's many things that I like about that piece, but it's so different from anything that I would write, that when I listen to the recording, I need to practice a lot of patience, more patience than I would have with my own music, quote unquote, because this is my music. There's this other piece in the Bestiario series that has to do with, I mean, I usually don't like to mention the animals that I imagine, but with Bestiario 1, I will probably never publish that piece, so I can say it. But there's another piece that has been published, and I'm not gonna say which one, just because I guess I don't want to, but it's a piece where the animal, even though it was alone, it was communicating with other animals far away. And the animal was expecting an answer, but it was taking so long. And like usually what I have to practice is patience in many ways, either with things being repetitive or things repeating in a way that I wouldn't like them to, or things taking longer than I want to, or actually in some cases things happening faster than I would want them to, because my music in general actually I think is kind of slow, but these things that I have to be patient with are usually slower, or then things happen too fast and I would like to live in them, but in the world some things just happen too fast, and too fast for you to enjoy them, I guess. And so these are the differences that that happen with these pieces. Amongst others, for example, there's some sounds that I probably wouldn't have chosen, but they are related to what in my mind is happening with the animal. and I just have to accept them. In the way that when cats are how do you say in celo? They want to mate. They make these
when they're in heat.
They make these horrible sounds that you're like, can you just stop? That happens too, and every time I talk about these pieces, I feel a little like people look at me like I'm a little bit crazy.
Do I look like that?
No, you don't. That's great. Because I understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm making it sound like many of these decisions are not mine, but I would argue that they are not. Or my decision is to respect them. That is my decision. But I do think that ideas are not mine only, and they're informed by so many narratives and experiences that are not my own. And I feel like my decision is to respect them, but that doesn't mean that the content of those decisions are necessarily only mine.
This leads me to a question I wanted to ask, and I had read in a couple of places that memory and collective memory is also something at play in your work. Say more.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's connected to this, right? I see collective memory as kind of the fabric with which we experience the world. By collective memory, what I mean is this pool or set of pools of stories, narratives, ideas, structures like language, like social structures, all of this that we share as not only as humans, but like especially within social groups. And sometimes we are part of clashing narratives in many ways. And for example, that is what it means for me to come from a place like Latin America. You have these sets of collective memories that are clashing or that are very painful in many ways, and they are part of you, even physically in your body. So I'm very interested in also collective memory as an entity that we relate to in many ways, because memory, particularly when it's part of a larger group, behaves like an organism. It evolves. Some strains of it go extinct if they don't adapt, if they don't serve a purpose. You can trace a genealogy, and I think it's something that a lot of us just we are in it without seeing it, kind of like the fish in the water. But when you think about it and you think that you can actually transform your relationship with it, and you can challenge certain narratives, and then becomes this very this living thing that you're in a way, but you're in and out at the same time. I find that interesting, and that's the reason why, and if I may relate this to the concert that will be happening on the 29th, I was very interested in bringing pieces that in a way relate to certain narratives about objects, about the world, about the way that we relate with these objects and the world. And that's also why I think it's really interesting to have Martin Lee Müller, because his philosophical practice, I would say that one of the centers of it is thinking of narrative as the area of possibility where we can actually transform the way that humans relate to non-human others, and we can actually transform all the systems that cause mass extinction, deterioration of the world, kind of like a this collective suicide that we're in. So I think it's very interesting, particularly how he does it, which is through Salmon, for example. But I would argue that, for example, Andrés Guadarrama, one of the composers in the concert, he does it through his relationship with the bass. Andrés is one of the best bass players I have ever met. Or this is the way in which I would say Patricia Martinez kind of tried to work with sounds of animals and humans and machines and mix them to also explore grief about all the animals dying, for, in this case, in the Amazon forest fires in 2019. I would say that through memory, we know things and we experience things, but it's not fixed. It's something that we can work with, and there's a lot there to explore.